hear me? I tend to be very low, whatever. I've been nervous today. I've done readings for 40, 50 years. They're old friends, and I understand there are students here and colleagues and all of that. And for some reason, I'm a little shaky, but I'll try and get through this. As Walter indicated, this is either strange or weird kind of book. When you mentioned the word scholars, I really don't think of myself as a scholar at all. I know people who are scholars. There's some scholars in the room who are really worthy of that title. I'm a creative writer, and so I come at all of this from a slightly different perspective. But it's someone I've always been interested in history. I've always been interested in the images of African Americans, particularly African American males. I've been one going on into my 6th or 7th decade or whatever the hell this is, and wonder, how people perceive not only myself but my brothers, as it were. And so think about history, and again, from the point of view of a creative writer, it kind of came to me that history is told in many ways according to the same kinds of rules that I use as a creative writer. And as I say in the introduction, and this is probably a long introduction to a short reading, if once somebody has taken over somebody else's territory, which is what history is about to a very large degree, then how do you justify that? Not only to the people who paid for the armaments and the troops, et cetera, but also the parents of the young men who were killed in that pursuit. So, how do you justify that? And it's told, obviously, it seems to me, against all kind of theory, you tell it from a point of view, which is essentially the same thing that I do as a creative writer. You find a kind of dramatic moment and emphasize that and justify it through whatever your means of, as a writer are. Same basic thing. So my take on history is slightly different from scholars and other folks. The other thing is that it seems to me that race is the deepest wound in American history. And in my kind of hybrid way, I attempt to examine, again, in this mix of scholarship and creativity, the creation of these images of blacks in the American consciousness. Also with drama and history, the parallel, there are always these moments when there's this kind of fork in the road. You can go this way or you can go that way. You can do this or you can do that. And that moment of decision will have these lasting consequences of everything that follows it. American history, it seems to me, is a series of these moments. And this book is intended as a kind of performance. I mean, I think of it in the same way I think of a kind of a Sonny Rollins concert, or a James Brown show, or a Baptist service, or a voodoo kind of ceremony, in which its intent, through its form and through its content, is to bring light and heat, and to expose and to essentially toast the behinds of the lowdown and their rituals of reassurance. And again, it seems to me that that's a lot of what happens in the world in terms of how we see the world is these rituals of reassurance. People just want to hear what they want to hear and be reassured by what they hear. Official history often, it seems to me, serves those kinds of purposes. So I've taken figures from history, often or always using their words and their actions in this often unabashed and again, these words and actions are often unabashed and unapologetically racist. And through the use of this,
so see the figures, you can get this to.
Yeah, I don't know if I tend to move and I would wave if I fail. Okay, which is the title of my next book. Taking the actions of history, taking the words of historical figures, and to try and create a kind of sense of irony in relation to all of this. What I'm going to read is chapter 10 and a part of chapter 11, which deals with essentially the failure of Reconstruction and the period beyond it. It's a kind of deconstruction of Reconstruction. The Civil War, which is over in 1865, the Emancipation Proclamation, which was put forth in 1863, and the formerly enslaved thought they were free. But by 1915, there were black codes. It was through a kind of combination of black codes and the Ku Klux Klan. Pretty much all notions that the enslaved had been put to rest. And so by 1915, essentially nobody in the South could vote. Nobody black. So we'll look at in this kind of fluttery way that I do this period. During this period also, there was the building of the Transcontinental Railroad, which linked the East Coast and the West Coast. That's a tremendous kind of giant step in the history of America. And one of the things that interested me in that is all these workers that came together. Again, it's one of those moments. You have all these various people who come together as labor for this project, and yet somehow they did not find a way to coalesce, did not find a way to come out of that with some kind of united bond, culturally or socially or politically. And it also effectively killed the Plains Indians culture. So there are two things that have happened here. We also get a brief portrait of William T. Sherman, one of the heroes of the Civil War. During this period also, we get the invention of photography, which will lead to motion pictures, which will encode all of these images of various peoples, et cetera, et cetera. Edward Muybridge is the person that I look at specifically. And I'm sure you've all seen his images. He does these series of still images that are taken with multi-cameras within seconds of each other. And then when you kind of flip through them, there's a sense of motion. And again, in symbolistic terms, that leads to the invention of the movies. Another name that will be mentioned here is Jim Rice, who was the first minstrel. Minstrelsy was this art form which was one of the earliest pop cultural art forms, phenomenons in America, where white men blackened their faces and did these very derogatory kinds of delineations of African Americans. And it was intended as humor, and it swept the country. It was, again, one of the first forms of pop culture. A brief mention here, too, of ragtime. Ragtime was just beginning to kind of bubble up through the surface, and that was one of the earliest instances of African-American influence on American culture. So, Chapter 10, Reconstruction and Beyond. William T. Sherman, Edward Muybridge, and syncopated locomotion of moving images in the Transcontinental Railroad, 1871-1877. Fade forward to 1871. Hear the inspiring soos alike. See the Confederate colors, the stars and bars being run up the flag staff. All is not lost. See the South in retrograde reconstruction. See the North turn its back on landless, lobby-lacking Negroes. And see the sun setting on those reconstructed darkies' false hopes. See their forward motion stopped in its tracks. Stopped or only slowed down again, like movement in the 1870s photographs of Edward James Muybridge, 1830